Okay. Okay, so welcome back to the fourth and last session of the day. And this session is about attacks on standards. And we will start with the bias plus knob attack against Bluetooth. This talk will be given by Daniele Antonioli.
Hi to everyone. I'm Daniele Antonioli, and it's my pleasure to give a talk about the bias and the knob attacks at the WAC workshop. I would like to thank the organizer for the invitation. This talk is about Bluetooth security, and in particular, I will review two attacks that we presented recently, the knob and the bias attacks. Such attacks are interesting for this workshop as they exploit vulnerability in Bluetooth key authentication and key negotiation mechanisms. In particular, the knob attack enables to downgrade and compute any Bluetooth session key, and the bias attack enables to impersonate any Bluetooth device without having to authenticate. Being standard compliant, the presented attacks are effective against billions of Bluetooth devices, including our smartphones, laptops, tablets, headsets, cars, and wearables. Let's start with an introduction about Bluetooth and Bluetooth security mechanisms. Bluetooth is a pervasive technology for low-power wireless communication. Bluetooth provides two transports, Bluetooth Classic for high-throughput services, including audio and voice, and Bluetooth Low Energy for very low-power services, including wearables and lately digital contact tracing. This talk covers both Bluetooth Classic and Bluetooth Low Energy, and to avoid confusion between the two, I will use two different acronyms, BT for Bluetooth Classic and BLE for Bluetooth Low Energy. Bluetooth is specified in a standard maintained by a group of companies known as the Bluetooth Special Interest Group, or Bluetooth SIG in short. The nice thing about the Bluetooth standard is that it can be downloaded for free. And some bad things about the standard are that it is complex to read, it includes custom security mechanisms, and it does not provide RF implementations for vendors. We have to remember that a single vulnerability in the Bluetooth standard enables to exploit billions of standard compliant devices in the wild. The Bluetooth standard provides two main security mechanisms, pairing and secure session establishment. Now let's see how those mechanisms are used to protect Bluetooth communication. Let's assume that we have two Bluetooth devices represented by Alice and Bob. Alice and Bob want to communicate securely over BT or BLE, and we assume that Bob acts as the Bluetooth master and Alice as the Bluetooth slave. Master and slave are technical terms in the Bluetooth standard used to denote the Bluetooth connection initiator and the responder roles. It is interesting to note that BT enables to switch master and slave roles after the connection is established, while BLE roles are fixed. Alice and Bob have never met before, and to establish a root of trust, they perform what is known as pairing. As a result of pairing, Alice and Bob agree on a pairing key indicated in figure as KL. Once Alice and Bob are paired, they can establish secure sessions. As part of the secure session establishment, they have to complete first a pairing key authentication phase, where Alice and Bob can prove that they own the same pairing key. After that, Alice and Bob, they perform session key negotiation to derive a session key indicated with KC prime, and the KC prime is derived from the pairing key and other runtime parameters. Then Alice and Bob use KC prime to encrypt and integrity protect their traffic. Note that each session has a different session key and the pairing key instead is static. Pairing and secure session establishment should protect against device impersonation, as an attacker who does not possess KL should not be able to complete the pairing authentication phase and establish a secure session with Bob as Alice or with Alice as Bob. Actually, with the bias attacks, we will see that this is not the case. Moreover, pairing and secure session establishment should protect against man-in-the-middle attacks, and in particular against attacks aimed to downgrade the strength of the pairing key or the session key. And with the knob attacks, we will see that this is not the case. Now we describe the knob attack on BLE. This attack targets BLE pairing by exploiting two standard compliant issues that we discovered. Let's see how BLE pairing works first, and then we'll talk about the issues and how to exploit them. BLE pairing has three phases. In the first phase, Alice and Bob exchange their features, including the strength of the pairing key. In the second phase, Alice and Bob compute the pairing key and optional authenticate it. In the third and last phase, Alice and Bob distribute additional keys over an encrypted link. The knob attack on BLE is enabled by issuing the feature exchange phase. During such phase, Alice sends a pairing request and Bob sends a pairing response. Those messages includes several features supported by Alice and Bob, including the strength of the pairing key. The Bluetooth standard calls the strength of the pairing key size, and the higher the key size, the higher is the entropy of the pairing key. Unfortunately, there are two standard compliant issues with key size. Firstly, the standard does not mandate to integrity protect and encrypt this parameter, and this enables an attacker to manipulate it with a man-in-the-middle attack. Secondly, the standard allows key size values between 7 and 16 bytes of entropy, and this allows an attacker to downgrade the strength of the pairing key to a really low value that can be brute forced. The combination of those two issues results in the knob attack on BLE. Let's see the knob attack on BLE in action. The victims, Alice and Bob, want to establish a secure session over BLE. To do that, they have to pair, and once they start the pairing process, Charlie can perform a man-in-the-middle attack during the feature exchange phase and downgrade the value of key size to 7 bytes, the lowest yet standard compliant value, despite Alice and Bob are proposing a key size of 16 bytes, that is the highest standard compliant value. After the feature exchange phase is completed, Alice and Bob establish a pairing key with 7 bytes of entropy, and all subsequent session keys that are derived from the pairing key will have 7 bytes of entropy as well. Charlie takes advantage of this fact by eavesdropping the encrypted traffic exchange between Alice and Bob as part of their secure session, and use the traffic as an oracle to brute force the session key. Once Charlie knows the session key, he defeats all security guarantees provided by Bluetooth Low Energy, and he is capable of decrypting all the traffic exchanged by Alice and Bob and injecting valid ciphertext in a secure session between Alice and Bob. Let's jump to the bias attack on Bluetooth Classic. As part of secure session establishment, Alice and Bob authenticate that they possess the correct pairing key using one of the two authentication mechanisms provided in the Bluetooth standard. The first mechanism is called Legacy Secure Connection Authentication, or LSC authentication in short, and provides unilateral authentication using the challenge response-based protocol. The second mechanism is called Secure Connection Authentication, or SC in short, and provides mutual authentication using a different challenge response-based protocol. Alice and Bob negotiate which mechanism to use as part of secure session establishment. In the next slide, we will see that both authentication mechanisms are vulnerable and they can be exploited to impersonate any Bluetooth device. In particular, we will describe 4 attacks: a master and slave impersonation attack on LSC and a master and slave impersonation attack on SC. Those attacks enable Charlie to establish secure sessions with Bob and Alice without possessing their pairing key and without having to authenticate such key. Let's start with the bias attack on LSC. LSC works as follows. With the first 2 messages, Alice and Bob exchange their Bluetooth addresses, indicated with A and B in the figure, and they negotiate LSC support. Then Bob sends a challenge to Alice. Alice sends back a response that was computed using Bob's challenge, her Bluetooth address, and the pairing key. Bob computes the response locally and checks it against the response received from Alice. If the responses are not equal, Bob aborts secure session establishment. Otherwise, he authenticates that Alice owns the correct pairing key. LSC authentication has 2 main issues. Firstly, is not used mutually during secure session establishment, and in particular, only the master authenticates the slave. Secondly, a device can switch authentication role before the procedure starts by triggering a BT role switch. We take advantage of those 2 issues to design master and slave impersonation attacks on LSC. The master impersonation attack works as follows. Charlie, the attacker, presents to Alice as Bob by sending Bob's Bluetooth address, the red bean figure, and LSC support. Alice sends her Bluetooth address and LSC support, believing that she's talking with Bob. Then Charlie completes unilateral authentication with Alice, ignores the response received from Alice, and continues session establishment without having to authenticate. Charlie can also impersonate any Bluetooth slave device when LSE is in use. In particular, Charlie presents to Bob as Alice and asks Bob to switch Bluetooth role before being asked to authenticate. Bob accepts the role switch request as it is standard compliant, and Charlie becomes the new master and as a side effect also the new verifier. Then Charlie completes unilateral authentication with Bob, ignores Bob's response, and continues the session establishment without having to authenticate to Bob. The slave impersonation bias attack on LSE is the first example of attack that makes adversarial use of Bluetooth role switching. We've just seen how to break LSE authentication. Now let's see how to break SC authentication. SC authentication works as follows. With the first two messages, Alice and Bob exchange their Bluetooth addresses, and then they negotiate SC support. Then Alice and Bob exchange two challenges, CB and CA, and they compute two different responses, RA and RB. The responses are based on the challenges, Alice and Bob Bluetooth addresses, and the shared pairing key. Then Alice sends RA to Bob. Bob sends RB to Alice, and both check that the received response match the one that they computed locally. If the responses are not equal, secure session establishment is aborted. Otherwise, Alice and Bob mutually authenticate that they own the same pairing key. Despite being more secure than LSE, we found that SC is still vulnerable to impersonation attacks for two main reasons. Firstly, SC and LSE can be negotiated, and such negotiation is not integrity protected. Secondly, SC support is not enforced between pairing and secure session establishment. This means that even if Alice and Bob support SC and already used it for pairing or for other secure sessions, they are not required to use SC for all the session establishment. Take advantage of both vulnerabilities to design master and slave impersonation attacks on SC authentication. A master impersonation attack works as follows. Charlie presents to Alice as Bob by sending Bob's Bluetooth address, the red bean figure, and lies about his capabilities by proposing LSC rather than SC. Even if Alice supports SC, the secure session is downgraded from SC to LSC, and this means that the authentication procedure is downgraded from mutual to unilateral. Then Charlie performed the master impersonation attack on LSC that we described before, and continues session establishment without having to authenticate. The slave impersonation attack exploits the same downgrade trick. Charlie presents to Bob as Alice, proposes LSC rather than SC, downgrades SC to LSC authentication, and then performs the slave impersonation attack on LSC, taking advantage of the role switch trick that we described before. To conclude the second part of my talk, I will describe the node attack on Bluetooth Classic. This attack targets the secure session establishment and can be combined with the bias attack that I just described. BT session establishment has three main phases. In the first phase, Alice and Bob authenticate their pairing key. As we have just seen, this phase is vulnerable to impersonation attacks. In the second phase, Alice and Bob negotiate a session key. In the third phase, they start a secure session based on the negotiated session key. The node attack on BT exploits issues in the session key negotiation. In this phase, Alice and Bob can negotiate the strength of the BT session key using a simple protocol. For example, Alice can propose a strength of 16 bytes, and Bob can either propose a lower value or accept 16 bytes. If Bob proposes 15 bytes, as in this example, then Alice can in turn propose a lower value or accept 15 bytes. Unfortunately, the session key negotiation phase has two main standard compliant issues. Firstly, the standard does not mandate to integrity protect and encrypt the entropy negotiation. Secondly, the standard allows entropy values between 1 and 16 bytes of entropy. And we can exploit both vulnerabilities to design the node attack of BT. In this figure, we can see an example of node attack on BT. Alice and Bob are already paired and share a strong pairing key. Then Alice and Bob starts a new secure session. And as part of the secure session, they authenticate their pairing key, and then they start session key negotiation. Charlie performs a man-in-the-middle attack during the session key negotiation phase and force Alice and Bob to negotiate session key with 1 byte of entropy. despite the fact that Alice and Bob proposed 16 bytes of entropy. Alice and Bob then used such very low entropy to derive a session key that is aimed to protect their communication. However, Charlie can trivially brute force the session key by using the exchange ciphertext as an oracle. As a result of the Nova attack on BT, Charlie breaks the secure session between Alice and Bob and is capable of decrypting all the traffic that is exchanged between Alice and Bob and injecting a valid ciphertext in the link. The BIAS and the Nova attacks can be combined, and the combination of those attacks is very powerful. It is enabled to break Bluetooth session establishment without requiring a man-in-the-middle attack. We recall that in the legitimate case, Alice and Bob can establish a secure session by completing authentication and session key negotiation. Let's see what happens when we combine the BIAS and the Nova attacks to target Alice and Bob. With the BIAS attack, Charlie can bypass authentication without knowing the pairing key. Then, with the Nova attack, Charlie can downgrade the entropy of the session key to a very low value. Finally, Charlie can start a secure session with Alice's Bob and brute force the low entropy session key, even if it was derived from a strong pairing key that Charlie does not know. Of course, Charlie can use the same procedure to attack Bob while impersonating Alice. And this slide concludes my talk. If you need more information about the presented attacks, have a look at the related research papers that I'm showing in this slide. If you want, you can also download the code to try the attacks yourself and check if your devices are patched or not. This is it, and thanks for your time.
Okay, we'll thank the speaker. And for those of you that have just joined us, a couple of reminders. First of all, if you want to hear some more details, you can either read the papers or go to YouTube, where we have the longer, more detailed versions of the talks. After the next talk, we will have a Q&A session, and you can either write the questions in the ICL chat via Zulip, or if you must, you can do it here in the Zoom chat, and I will read it. Or you can just open the mic. And okay, so now we'll go to the last talk of today. And this talk is about practical decryption, exFiltration, breaking PDF encryption. And the talk will be given by Jens Müller.
Thanks. So let me see if this works.
You will share it.
Mate will share it.
Oh, great.
That way we know it works. So let me share it. That should be working.
Hello everyone, welcome to the talk on how to break PDF encryption. My name is Jens Müller, I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Bochum, and today I will give you an introduction to our research, which is a joint work with the University of Applied Sciences in Münster on security flaws in the PDF encryption standard, which we call PDF exFiltration or PDFX. Now, what is PDFX? Some of you may have heard about it. It's yet another attack that comes with a logo. And PDFX introduces two novel attacks on PDF encryption, which I will present today. Both are weaknesses in the standard and were found by carefully reading the standard. One is based on flaws in the PDF data format structure, which allows for partial encryption. We call this direct exFiltration. The other one is based on actual crypto flaws in the used block cipher modes of operation called malleability gadgets. Okay, so here's an outline of today's talk. First, I'm going to give a short introduction to PDF and who actually uses PDF encryption. Then I'm going to introduce our attacker model and show our first attack on how to directly exfiltrate the plain text without even touching the crypto. And then I'm going to show our more cryptographic attack, CBC malleability gadgets, and how to practically apply them, as well as an evaluation of these attacks on 27 popular PDF viewers and existing countermeasures. Let's start with some facts on PDF. So we are all familiar with PDF, the portable document format, a de facto standard for electronic document exchange. PDF was developed in the early 90s by Adobe and later became an ISO standard, with PDF 2.0 being the current version. According to Adobe, 250 billion PDF documents have been opened in their products in one single year, so I guess it's fair to say that PDF is used in almost every company and institution out there. It's a rather popular file format. And PDF also supports AES-based document encryption, using either password-based or certificate-based crypto. Now AES is considered pretty secure, right? So if someone breaks AES, the sky is falling anyway, right? So we thought, we can basically give up here, but we didn't want to yet give up, and maybe we find some flaws in how they did it, we thought, and researched further. But first, let's have a look on who actually uses PDF encryption. For example, our local German bank does. They know that a lot of their customers cannot handle PGP or S/MIME, therefore they send sensitive data as encrypted PDF attachments in an email, while the password is sent over a second channel such as SMS. There's even companies that allow you to do this directly in the email client by selling you plugins for Outlook, for example. Then there's scanners and MFPs that allow you to set a PDF password if you use the scan to email function, which somewhat makes sense. And finally, PDF encryption is used by companies and governments worldwide, for example, by the US Department of Justice. So we thought it's worth having a deeper look on how it works. But let's first define an attacker model. Assume Alice wants to send a PDF document to Bob. She's going to encrypt the document because the communication channel is not trusted. This could be email, for example. Or assume a shared storage service where Alice uploads a document and Bob later on downloads it, but there may be a third party, for example other users, that have access to this storage. So in such cases we cannot rely solely on TLS, we need end-to-end encryption, and using PDF encryption is a somewhat logical candidate for such a workflow. Now what is our attacker allowed to do? Our attacker is an active man in the middle who can perform targeted modifications of encrypted PDF documents, either in transit or at rest. He can change the document structure, or he can manipulate the ciphertext itself, for example by flipping bits. Now the goal of our attacker is that when Bob opens the modified document that is relayed to him using his password, for example, he leaks the plain text to an attacker-controlled server, which will result in the direct exfiltration attacks. Let's first have a look at the simplified structure of a PDF document. So PDF documents, they consist of 4 parts: a header, which is basically one single line containing the PDF version of the document, then with a body, which is the most important part, containing the definition of pages within a document as well as their actual content. Then there's a cross-reference section which contains an indexing table defining the offsets of all those objects within the document. And finally we have a trailer which contains some more information, such as a reference to the root element of the document. So basically PDF documents, they are processed from the bottom to the top. Now let's encrypt this very PDF document and observe the differences. Now that looks interesting, right? Not everything is actually encrypted. All that happened is that an encrypt object is added to the trailer section, which contains information like the decryption scheme to be used, for example AES 256 or whatever. And only the objects containing the actual content are encrypted, but not the document structure. Why is this? So let's have a look at the standard. So the PDF standard says that all strings and streams are to be encrypted, but not other object types such as integers or Boolean values. The reason for this is efficiency. So random access to all objects in a document is to be granted. Well, fair enough. What does that mean in practice? Basically, it means that the whole structure of PDF documents remains unencrypted. only strings and streams in a document are actually encrypted. In other words, a passive attacker who obtains an encrypted document can already reveal a lot of information like the number of pages in a document, even the number of objects, if there's any hyperlinks, and so on. So from a security perspective, this already looks interesting, but maybe there's more. Let's once again have a look at the standard. So in 2003, PDF introduced crypt filters to provide a finer granularity control of encryption within a PDF file. What does that mean in practice? It means that not all content streams in a document have to be encrypted. You can create a document of which some content is encrypted and other content is not. There may be legitimate use cases for this. But it also means that every standard compatible PDF viewer must support partial encryption. So in other words, an active man-in-the-middle attacker who can modify a document can add and mix his content with the actually encrypted content. And there's not only crypt filters. By carefully studying the specification, we found 18 different techniques to do so. So I guess it's fair to say that a PDF viewer that currently implements the current version of the standard must support partially encrypted documents. Okay, so an attacker can easily add new content to encrypted PDF files. You may now say, well, fair enough, the standard claims protection for confidentiality, not for integrity of the document. So the question arises, can we do more? Can we do some targeted manipulations? Can we use this technique somehow to exfiltrate maybe the plain text by modifying the document structure? Let's have a look at the standard again. So if you search the PDF specification for a document's possibilities to communicate with the outside world, you will quickly spot features like submit form actions. So PDF files that can contain basically forms like HTML forms. And they use the same data type for content to be displayed and for PDF form field values. That's interesting. The value of a form can be any reference to a stream or string. And wait, now that's exactly the content types that can be encrypted in PDF documents. So we thought, why not add a form to the encrypted PDF file and then exfiltrate the data once the user clicks on a submit form button. But then we thought clicking on a button is lame. Why not submit the form data automatically once the document is opened and decrypted by the user using, for example, an open action event, resulting in a minimal example like this. So what we can see here is basically a PDF form that's automatically opened, and the form value is the object number 2, which is the encrypted data, which is decrypted once the document is opened and the user inputs his password, resulting in the plain text being exfiltrated automatically. There are other variants of this attack, so you can also use hyperlinks. And there's even JavaScript, if supported by the PDF viewer, to achieve the same effect. Let's come to the second attack class, malleability gadgets. So these attacks have 3 requirements: ciphertext malleability, known plain text, and exfiltration channel. We already can check this because we already have seen 3 examples of exfiltration channels. Let's have a look at ciphertext malleability. So this is the decryption function of CBC, cipher blockchaining mode, as used by PDF encryption. And basically you get the plain text by decrypting a block of ciphertext and XORing it with the previous block of ciphertext. So what happens if we change one single bit? Then the very same bit in the resulting ciphertext is actually changed. Now what happens if we know the content of a whole plaintext block? In such a case, we could XOR that onto the first block and get all zeros, or basically what we call a gadget or a blank sheet of paper, because we can basically write on that by taking a chosen plaintext and XORing it to the result. And this way we can, for example, construct URLs within the chosen plaintext. We can also clone such gadgets, move them around and so on. However, due to the avalanche effect of CBC, we'll get a block of random bytes. However, this is not a problem in practice. So much for ciphertext malleability check, because there's also no integrity protection at all in PDF encryption. Okay, let's see if we can find some known plaintext. So interestingly, PDF supports known plaintext by design, because there's a permissions object which is going to be encrypted, and the standard says that it starts with all zeros, and then there's a copy of an unencrypted permissions value and some other mostly fixed values and some random. So we have 12 bytes of known plaintext in the PDF specification by design. Okay, that's known plaintext, check. And those 12 bytes of plaintext, they basically allow us to change the displayed text in an encrypted document, but also to define, for example, new form submission URLs, similar to the attacks shown before, but now this time through the ciphertext itself. But you can also use hyperlinks or JavaScript and other features to exfiltrate the plaintext. Okay, let me come to an evaluation. So we tested 27 popular PDF applications, basically each and every PDF viewer that supports document decryption, and by design, almost all of them are vulnerable. Some of them, 4 of them, do not support certain PDF standard features, therefore the direct exfiltration attacks do not work, but basically all of them are vulnerable either with user interaction or without user interaction. Let me come to countermeasures. To counter against wrapping attacks or direct exfiltration attacks, we think that in the long term, the standard should remove support for partial encryption. In the short term, implementations should disallow access from unencrypted to encrypted objects. And to counter CBC malleability gadgets, instead of CBC without any integrity protection, maybe we should use a modern scheme that supports authenticated encryption, but be careful here to prevent downgrade attacks. Actually, the answer of Adobe was that the current next version of the PDF specification is currently being worked on, and those issues are going to be addressed in the next version of the standard. Okay, let me come to a conclusion. So PDF encryption can be broken in the scenario of an active attacker. And PDF is one of those formats that support partially encrypted documents, which can be considered as dangerous and allows for direct exfiltration. Also, PDF uses legacy crypto like AES-CBC without any integrity protection instead of a modern scheme. And the latest version of the standard even has known plaintext by design, allowing for gadget attacks. And finally, PDF is a data format that allows to exfiltrate itself to an attacker-controlled server. Thank you. You can find all the exploit files on pdf-insecurity.org. Okay, enjoy the rest of this virtual conference.
Okay, we'll thank the speakers. And as for the rest of the virtual conference, so now we have the final Q&A session. And we can write, either ask the questions here in Zoom or in the chat of the ICR. So maybe I will start with the questions for basically both speakers. You both attacked standards which are really complicated with thousands of pages of design, and I guess a lot more issues that might be hidden. Do you have any thoughts of how can we take this type of standards with all of the problem with backward compatibility and everything that we always see, and try to actually improve them so in 1, 2, 3 years we can actually use Bluetooth or PDF in a safe manner?
Should I start first? Yeah, okay, sure. I will speak about Bluetooth in my case. So actually, after we disclosed some of those vulnerabilities, the standard was updated, but the update was just a minimal mitigation. So for example, for Bluetooth Classic, it was possible to negotiate session keys with 1 byte of entropy. And now the standard upgraded the minimum entropy value to 7 bytes. That is still DES compliant, let's say like this, but is in line with Bluetooth Low Energy. So for example, one way to drastically improve the standard is to remove this entropy negotiation feature, because we still don't understand why it is in the standard, in my opinion. But then of course you can introduce some legacy compliant issues then. So it is always a trade-off between legacy compliance and security, I guess.
So regarding PDF, the current process is that Adobe wrote us that that integrity protection is actually has been added to the PDF 2.1 version of the standard, which is going to be released really soon now. But we do not have actually access yet to the ISO working group. So because it's kind of, it's not super easy for a university. So we first need to check if we go there as a university, or if we join the university, or if we join the working group as individuals and so on, because it's also a cost issue. We haven't had actually, we weren't able yet to look at the current version and how they did it, but I think they did it correctly, I hope. But I do not have any information regarding if they really also removed the feature of partial encryption from the standard, which I also would actually vote for. I don't know. I mean, there may be legitimate features, like, for example, in Adobe, in the professional version of Acrobat, you can create attachments that are not encrypted or only encrypted attachments and things like that. But do we really need such features? Isn't it? We shouldn't have data formats, I think, that support it. But I'm not aware of how far the standard is regarding the direct exfiltration issues.
So maybe one more question. I think in both cases that you've shown, both in Bluetooth and PDF, a major issue that maybe a root cause for the problems was the use of unauthenticated encryption, if it was in the protocol or in the encryption PDF. Can you see any other root causes that might lead to similar issues, or things that come out of different requirements?
So in case of Bluetooth, one major issue was about the lack of integrity protection of the feature exchange. And this is a major, I think, point, because once you have the feature negotiation and you include sensitive features such as the entropy of the key, or maybe the security mode, because one other thing that you can negotiate in Bluetooth is the security level, let's say. So you have this secure connections mode that is the strongest security mode, and then you have the legacy secure connection mode. So if you don't integrity protect those things, then you can downgrade, easily downgrade the strength of the link.
I would totally agree. So for PDF, if you use authenticated encryption, you would be fine, at least regarding the crypto attacks, like the CBC multiplication gadget attacks. Maybe I can add an anecdote. It's actually PDF is we did basically this paper was a copy of eFail, which was a paper we did like in 2018, because email or PGP and SMIME allowed had basically the same issues. So they both allowed partial encryption, and so those direct exfiltration attacks, and also no real integrity protection. And for Office document formats, we currently see the same issues. And I think there's a lot of standards that have been built basically in the 90s, and therefore they used CBC or whatever, and also allow this kind of wrapping of encrypted and unencrypted content. And you see those issues in a lot of file formats. And yeah, if you would rewrite a new file form, probably maybe you would do it differently.
Okay, so if we don't have any other questions, we'll thank all of the speakers again for the workshop. And we want to thank you all for joining us. And again, thanks to Kevin and Kay here that helped us with all of the technical issues of running this workshop. Have a good day and enjoy the rest of crypto. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.